Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd, and we have some updates surrounding the NFL ongoing conflict about the idea of whether or not they will be expanding to 18 games. The NFL Players Association is in discussion with the league about what that would mean. So we are going to be diving into sort of where things stand as far as that ongoing negotiation. We're then going to be continuing on with our previews of all 32 NFL teams for the upcoming year. We're just over 40 days away from kickoff. So today we are going to be covering the Cleveland Browns, who last year, despite a number of different injuries, were able to win 11 games and make it to the playoffs. So we'll be breaking down what the expectations should be for Deshaun Watson coming off of his injury-riddled year and entering the peak of his contract, making over $63 million in this season and for the following two. So we're going to break down their schedule and talk about my predictions for this upcoming season for them. And then we are going to be discussing where things stand in the MLB in regards to the playoff picture. With the first few games out of the All-Star break under the books, we already have some significant changes to where things stand currently in the standings, so we will be talking about that, and then we will wrap up the show with final thoughts here on the NBA Summer League. Last night, the Miami Heat brought it home in what ended up being a pretty good game that went to overtime, so we'll talk about that, the overall significance of what the history of the Summer League can show us, and finally, we will be handing out grades to all 14 lottery picks from the 2024 draft based off of their performance in Summer League alone. So we will get to all of that, but before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And finally, if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment, it'll pop up on screen for everyone to see. You can become a bigger part of the show, and anything would be greatly appreciated there. It's been really probably, it's been a while since the NFL has thrown out the idea of whether or not they will be continuing to expand the season. Just a couple years ago in 2021, we saw them up the number of games in the regular season from 16 to 17, and they're not looking to stop there, as Roger Goodell has openly talked about the idea that he is in favor of adding another week to the NFL season and putting on another set of games, which is something that when we saw in 2021, this was not a popular idea from the players. A lot of them had real reservations about how it could impact their health, already such a physically taxing sport, and adding on more games to that. It's fair that they would have their complaints, but there's always two sides of negotiation, and the players decided that there were a couple other things that they wanted to, end up getting out of the deal, and ultimately that feels like this is where it's headed again, where NFL players may resist at first about the idea of the league going to an 18-game schedule, but at the same time, there are going to be negotiation tactics in place that they want to have some of the leverage back themselves. Now, a second bye week is something that is probably most tied into this type of an idea, where Joe Burrow actually just recently spoke about it a couple weeks ago. He was on an interview with the Barstool podcast, Pardon My Take, and during that appearance, he was talking about the idea of how he is not necessarily in favor of an 18th game, but that if they were going to make the season longer, the natural next step would be to add another bye week and have it be a universal one, for an idea that I personally love of throwing in some of the Pro Bowl experiences in the middle of the year and having an all-star break type of situation, such as like we see in all of the other major sports in America. And that's something where, it's one of those conversations when you talk about all-star festivities that everybody wants to fix them, and the reality of the situation is there probably isn't anything that can be done that will actually get the all-star game back to a competitive nature that, fans typically want. But for the NFL, the Pro Bowl is probably the biggest joke out of any of the four major sports in terms of the different activities they do. And I do feel like part of the problem with that is the fact that it's coming right ahead of the Super Bowl. We're watching all these playoff games. We're in that mode, that intensity, and we get this little bit of a joke of a situation sort of taking place right before, where they don't even play an actual game anymore. They play flag football, and it's just so unserious in comparison to that point in the season where it's do or die in the NFL in February, and the Pro Bowl feels just so out of place. So, I'm not saying that the Pro Bowl is ever going to be this must-see event, but at the same time, I do feel like it's going to have a little bit more relevance if it is in the middle of the season, and it makes a lot of sense for the sake of the players as well to be able to have some extra rest. So it was an idea that stood out to me about, a possibility. Now again, Adam Schefter, very shortly after that Joe Burrow interview, he was on the Pat McAfee show, and he was talking about how it is widely not a popular idea with NFL players, the idea of them adding this 18th game, which is very understandable again. But, the NFL is going to need to be able to give something back to their players if they were to make this decision, which I do inevitably feel like it is going to happen no matter what, because the NFL wants to make as much money as possible. That's kind of always been their primary goal. And you have more games, you have more TV revenue, more ticket sales, all of that. So, financially for them, they are going to will this into existence. So it doesn't matter whether or not you or I are asking for more regular season games, which, to be honest, I don't know how many people are necessarily asking for that. But the league understands that if they play games, people are going to watch. NFL is the king of sports leagues in America, and it is something where they know no matter how many games they throw in, people will be interested. So ultimately, it feels like it is inevitable to some degree. Now, it would likely take years to take place, where as things currently stand, it would have to be approved under a collective bargaining agreement. The current CBA for the NFL lasts until 2030. So that would sort of be generally the baseline of when, if there are going to be any changes, that's when you could expect it. But the Players Association has also expressed interest that they could be open to negotiating before the current CBA expires, and there's nothing that would stop them from already altering the agreement that they have now, and, they could renegotiate. Now, how this comes into play with the media deals and such, I don't necessarily have all the details there, but again, it's something where it's going to be a negotiation process, and this isn't anything I would expect to see in the next few years. This is going to take some time, but again, the NFL, I feel like, is going to will this to happen, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of demands the Players Association would ask. I feel like baseline, at least publicly, we've already heard another bye week would be one of the priorities for NFL players if this were to take place. I'm sure there is probably some sort of financial, the NFL is, I believe for the most part, the only league in American sports where contracts are fully guaranteed. Now, there are exceptions in other leagues as well, but the standard NFL contract usually isn't, and that's not the case in those other sports. So I'm sure that is something that, it almost feels like every offseason we get some sort of athlete from the NBA or from the MLB make some sort of jokes about, or I should say this, it's more so NFL stars and sometimes MLB, but them making jokes every offseason when the NBA comes around and you see all of these massive contracts that are handed out, and NFL players joke a little bit about how they are going to start training their kids to be basketball players instead of football players. And the simple math there of 15 guys on an NBA roster in comparison to 53 in the NFL is obviously where that differential comes in. But I could see NFL players definitely trying to push for more guarantees. We'll see what the consensus will be on that. Owners would definitely push back, but we will see. But ultimately, again, I feel like this is something that is just kind of inevitable, and we understand that the league is trying to dip their hands in any possible way to make themselves extra revenue. This is a prime example of how they could be doing so. And, I think that, again, it's just sort of written in the stars already. But, let me know in the comment section whether or not you are hoping for an 18th week, or it would be technically at this point a 19th week. It might even be 20 if they're adding in a universal bye week as well. So there's still a whole lot of things that are going to be worked out here. Again, the NFL is going to make it happen, as much as they want to, but definitely let me know in the comments section what your hopes would be for if they were to go through with this, how it would look. But we are going to be taking our first break of the show now, and when we come back on the other side, sticking with some NFL, and we are continuing on our season previews for all 32 NFL teams. Today we have the Cleveland Browns. So how will Deshaun Watson be able to respond after having an injury-riddled season and now having these extremely expensive years kick in with his contract, where he's going to be making over $63 million for the next few years, and really has not shown elite levels of play in multiple years. So we'll be discussing all of that, but first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and you'll be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing to preview the upcoming NFL season for all 32 teams. We are running through the AFC North currently, and today we are going to be talking about the Cleveland Browns, who last year had a very successful season considering these circumstances, which is why Kevin Stefanski went on to win the Coach of the Year award. And it comes from a number of different injuries, most notably to Deshaun Watson, who really is yet to live up to expectations since getting his massive contract from the Browns. And we are at this point 4 years removed from seeing Deshaun Watson be elite. That 2020 season was the last time we were able to see the best version of Watson. At that point, it seemed like he was destined to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, that he could potentially have some sort of budding rivalry with Patrick Mahomes at the top of the AFC, and instead things have gone entirely sideways for Watson because of some of the off-the-field struggles that kept him out for... Well, it was him holding out himself for an entire year, and then it was obviously the investigations that went on off the field as well that kept him out for a lot of time additionally. So Watson, we are far removed from it, but we still did see him starting to, it seemed like at least, shape into some version of himself that we recognized during his last couple games of this season during the 2023 season against the Cardinals and notably against the Ravens. The Cardinals statistics were off the charts, easily his best that we've seen since his tenure in Houston, but maybe a little bit of a worse personnel there, but he also led the Browns to a win against their division rival Ravens, and the Ravens had one of the best defenses in the NFL. So you can start to talk yourself into Watson, and then all of a sudden it was immediately followed up by an injury. He missed the previous 4 games before that Arizona week, and then after that Ravens game, he was done for the year. So he only played 6 games last season, and the majority of it was not up to the standards of what he's about to be paid, because he still has another 3 years remaining on his deal, and his cap hit is now going to be jumping to over $63 million according to SpotRack in each of the next 3 seasons. Now, the Browns, they signed a couple backup quarterbacks to at least have an option. They almost had to let Joe Flacco walk, because otherwise we could have been rearing towards a little bit of a quarterback controversy. The Browns started going on their run when Joe Flacco took over, and he played pretty well for the most part. I do feel like it was slightly overrated to some degree, considering the fact that he was just kind of throwing things up. The interception rate was very high, but they were also winning games and he was getting results. So not by any means to, dump on Joe Flacco, but that being said, we could have been heading towards a very strange debate between a 40-year-old Flacco and a Deshaun Watson who's going to be making over $63 million. So they let Flacco walk. They bring in Jameis Winston and Tyler Huntley on 1-year deals to back him up. For the money that Watson is being paid, he just flat out needs to be better, and this would be almost a worst-case scenario if Huntley or Winston were to take over. Also, for whatever it's worth, with Watson's injuries last season, it's always nice to have a little bit of insurance there at the position. But as for my expectations for Deshaun Watson, I don't think we can really expect him to be a definitive top 10 plus quarterback in the league. Now, if he can be in that range of a top 10 guy, I think Browns fans can be somewhat satisfied. You still might not love the player. You definitely don't love the contract if that's the type of results you're getting. But he would be massively overpaid at that point if he's struggling to crack that top 10 for the rest of his career, especially considering the fact that the trade, along with all the money, they gave up 3 first-round picks and some other draft capital. So the price was very expensive to get Watson, but you feel like you're probably pretty on par with some of the other contenders in the NFL if Deshaun Watson can just be a reliable, steady presence for you at that quarterback position. It's been Kevin Stefanski, he might have won his 2nd Coach of the Year award just last season. Stefanski's been a very good addition to their team since they added him. I was trying to see if I could double check on the fly here about the coach of the year, but it's not that important. He did win it last season, and they have a very good defense as well. So that's something that you can definitely feel positive about. And Watson, he is going to need to be better for a number of reasons, but including the fact that we don't really know what we're going to get from Nick Chubb this season either, who suffered a season-ending injury in Week 2 last year against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He tore a number of different ligaments in his knee. We've seen Chubb deal with injuries in the past, specifically back when he was at Georgia. So the Browns made some efforts this offseason to add some depth at the position. Deontay Foreman and Naheem Hines, which I think that Foreman, I mean, he's always due for at least that one big week every season in the NFL. So behind one of the better offensive lines, they can still have a rush attack, but it was clear that they missed him last season. When you look at their overall numbers, they were 12th in the league in rush yards per game. You would think that if there is more of a legitimate passing attack, that they would be able to benefit, considering Nick Chubb could have emptier boxes in front of him and he can get himself some more space. But you look at their stats from last year, the biggest thing is the third down numbers. They were 29th in the league, and that is usually pretty indicative of a couple of things. One, that they are not getting enough yardage on first and second down, that they are put into longer third down situations than you'd prefer, and also just the fact that you are not converting, you don't have good enough quarterback play to be able to overcome maybe some shortcomings on first and second down, where the Browns converted just 31.6% of their third downs. You look at the offenses that are in that same realm. You know, only teams worse than them were the Patriots, the Giants, and the Jets. They're below the Titans, the Panthers, the Colts, the Raiders, the Commanders, all of these different teams. That's not the company you want to be in. And it's going to be difficult as well, considering the fact that they just lost their offensive coordinator last year in Alex Van Pelt, who is going to the Patriots. So they replace him with Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator for the Bills last year, that overall did he did a fine job with the Bills, you can make an argument for, but at the same time, something needed to change with that Bills offense last year, so they ended up firing him partway through the season, and they did improve after that. So you can't exactly feel great about Ken Dorsey up to this point, but we'll see. They have a lot of foundational pieces on that offense if they can just string them together. And the reason for optimism with the Browns is because their defense last season was elite. They were, setting records in terms of yards allowed per game. They were number one in defensive efficiency, defensive EPA, 3-and-outs forced. They were unbelievable. And for the most part, they are returning the majority of that same group, where they lost a little bit of linebacker depth with Anthony Walker Jr. and Sione Takitaki. They both left in free agency, but they signed Jordan Hicks in the offseason as well, where he's somebody who's coming off of his fifth straight season with 100 or more tackles. He was dealing with some injuries last year. He's getting into his early 30s, so we will probably start to see some level of decline from him, but a pretty nice pickup in general. I did a video, I think it was last week, where I talked about breakout candidates in the NFL, and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is one of my favorite players in the NFL to make a splash. The linebacker last year was phenomenal. He had his first 100-plus yard season, 100-plus tackle season, was selected to his first Pro Bowl appearance, and I do think somebody that could potentially be an All-Pro candidate for years to come. But like I said, returning the majority of their starters, But the biggest difference of what we're going to see from last year to this year, specifically on that defensive side, is the level of competition from the quarterback position that they will be facing, because they feasted last year against inferior competition, but this season they are going to have more of a test ahead of them. They only faced 3 quarterbacks last year who finished in the top 12 in quarterback rating. That was Lamar Jackson, Brock Purdy, and Matthew Stafford. And when they went on to face CJ Stroud and the Texans in the playoffs, it was not pretty for them. Now, granted, the 45 points that were scored by the Texans that game was a little bit misleading to the Browns defense, considering the fact that 14 of those points came off of Joe Flacco pick sixes. They allowed 24 points in the first half. Definitely got jumped a little bit, but they came out a lot stronger in the second half. Were unfortunate, the defense at least, because the offense wasn't giving them any sort of help. But like I mentioned, only 3 of those top echelon quarterbacks, and next year, looking at their schedule, they are going to have a number of different challenges ahead of them, where it is 6 quarterbacks in that same top 12 of QBR last year. It is Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Tua Tagovailoa, and Jalen Hurts are all on the schedule for them this year. They will also likely face a healthier Joe Burrow, who should be a significantly better version of himself. So, a lot more tests ahead for their defense this year. According to Sharp Football Analysis, they have the 3rd hardest schedule in the NFL for this upcoming year. So they're going to definitely be tested. And again, I have faith in their defense to still be one of those top tier groups, but it is a little bit unrealistic to expect them to have that same sort of historical impact. They're going to need more from their offense this year, which is definitely a possibility, but especially down the stretch of the season, where you see they have 3 games on the road against divisional opponents from week 14 to 18. In between those matchups, they're going to have to face the Chiefs and the Dolphins, 2 high-powered offenses. So we're going to need to see more from Deshaun Watson and that offensive group. Their over-under for the season is currently sitting at 8.5, which, again, it's kind of interesting to evaluate it that way, because they won 11 games last year and they should have their starting quarterback this season, but there are going to be a lot more obstacles in the way for them. So with that being said, I am predicting that they are going to go 9-8. That's enough to be in the conversation for the playoffs, but the top of the AFC is deep, so all of these teams are going to be scratching and clawing with one another for those final playoff spots. The AFC North is always a difficult outing, so you're going to have to be competing with probably all 4 of, or I should say all 3 of the other teams that sort of round out that division as well. Looking at how the Browns prediction stacks up to how I feel about the rest of the AFC so far. The Ravens and Bengals I both have in that range of winning 11 games. Their over-under lines are just around there as well. I believe the Ravens are at 11.5 and the Bengals are at 10.5. So the Browns are probably slightly worse than these other 2 teams. Again, Browns were able to take advantage of not playing a 100% healthy Joe Burrow. The Bengals are going to be more of a threat this season, and there are just other obstacles in the way for them. So ultimately, 9-8, a pretty good year. That is over their betting line for this season. I do have faith, but again, we're going to have to actually see some level of a better offense, you should say, from the Browns to be able to compete. But let me know where you think the Browns are going to end up this year. Again, just to recap, 9-8 for me. But obviously, it is going to be a battle every time in that AFC North, and a lot of things could shake out differently, so we will see. But let me know in the comments section. We're going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into the MLB and where things currently stand there coming out of the All-Star break in terms of the current playoff positioning. So we will be diving into all of that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're going to be diving into the current playoff race in the MLB, where we're coming out of the All-Star break. Obviously, so much was made of it at the time, where teams currently standed, and just sort of looking at the biggest stories coming out of the break, the first of which being that the Houston Astros are officially back. And not to give myself credit or anything, but I was never ready to count out the Astros even when they had the disastrous start that they did. They were 12 games under 500. They were 10 games back of the Mariners for the division, I believe, but they had been putting it together after a hot June and were coming out of the All-Star break with a series against their division rival, the Seattle Mariners, who held the number 1 spot in that division, and the Astros won 2 out of 3 to jump ahead of them. It was the first time, specifically after that second game that they won on June 20th, they pulled ahead and were first in the AL West for the first time all season. And it has been pretty tremendous to see the way that they have put this all together seemingly pretty quick, where the Astros were still 8 games under 500 headed into June, and since then they have gone 27-15 to not just climb out of a deficit, but they are now at the top of the division. Now, because of yesterday's games, they ended up losing to the Oakland Athletics, so they are currently tied with the Mariners for that number 1 spot in the AL West. But still, for all of these injuries that they have been putting up with over the course of the year, to see the resilience that they've been able to play with, I know there are a ton of people that are always ready to sort of dance on the grave of the Houston Astros, in large part because of some allegations against them at the end of the 2010s, but you just have to give credit to this organization and the way that they continue to show consistency, resilience, and there's a reason why they are riding this streak of, I want to say it's 7 ALCS appearances in a row. So, you know, the Astros, you have to give them their credit even if you dislike them. Now, on the other side of this series, for the Mariners, was a really rough stretch, not to mention that their star player Julio Rodriguez as well ended up suffering an ankle injury as he was trying to make a play in the field in that third game, and ultimately it sounds like the x-rays are negative and that he is going to be back at some point soon. He's currently being listed as day-to-day, but it was just sort of a slap in the face, along with the fact that they have been massively struggling as of late, where they are 9-17 over their last 26 games. Only during that stretch, only the Chicago White Sox, the worst team in baseball, have a lower OPS. The offense is just not producing enough for them, and they're just kind of having down seasons across the board for a lot of their key players, which to some degree does include Julio Rodriguez. He's still having a good season, kind of hovering closer to league average though, as opposed to the past couple seasons where he was one of those borderline MVP candidates. He was at least having that sort of consideration, and that's just not the case this year, and they have needed him to be more. Now again, by no means would I want to put it all on Julio Rodriguez. You look across the line here, they're starting to make moves where they just put Ty France on waivers, considering the fact that, they just need more from especially their first baseman, but slash 223, 312, and 350 so far this season. They are definitely going to be in play at the trade deadline of trying to make some sort of spark moves. Now, replacing first baseman would be, obviously one of the top priorities there. There is a pretty substantial first baseman that is being shopped this trade deadline in Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Now, are the Mariners necessarily the type of franchise and ownership group that you are convinced that they would be willing to go all in on a package that would cost a lot for Vladdy Jr.? I would say probably not. So I definitely don't want to get anybody's hopes up there, but it would be a pretty fun experiment, I think, to see Vladdy with the rest of these guys in Seattle. It's interesting because the organization hasn't necessarily shown an elite desire to become a World Series contender. Now, they're thinking that, I think they had a quote exactly where they're talking about winning somewhere around 98 games and just trying to be competitive on a year in, year out basis. The way that the MLB currently is with the playoff format, and just in general with baseball, where teams can get hot and just sort of carry it through to a World Series title, a la the Texas Rangers last season. But ultimately, we know that the Mariners have a very clear strength, being their pitching. They have probably the best starting rotation in the MLB when you look at the combination of guys like Logan Gilbert and George Kirby and Luis Castillo, Bryce Miller. I'd probably throw, probably the worst out of the group, but still a guy that you can feel good about in any sort of a playoff series. And, ultimately, I think that when you look at where this team is at, it's a weird situation, considering the fact that they are still, amongst the top of the AL West, but the way that they've been trending, it's clear that they need something else. They have the worst strikeout rate in baseball, and would they want to potentially look into mortgaging some of that pitching talent in exchange for a hitter? You'd guess probably not, but either way, they're going to need help offensively. So, we'll see how things play out there. Feels like this is the golden opportunity for the Astros to just pull away from the Mariners, but at the same time, Seattle's got to be sitting there thinking that even though the two teams seem to be headed in different trajectories, they still have a great opportunity to pull this away from the Astros if they can get themselves right. But the other biggest change in terms of the playoff race is that third wild card spot in the American League. The Red Sox were really hot going into the All-Star break, and they were holding that final wild card spot when they went into it, but since then they have fallen apart. And again, the vibes were high for the Red Sox, who were able to knock off the Kansas City Royals in that final series before the break as well, where the Royals are the team that right now they are currently competing with for that spot, and they were able to win 2 out of 3, but since then they have lost 4 straight games. And we just talked about the Mariners and where they currently stand. Whoever doesn't win that AL West is going to be in the conversation for that wild card spot as well. Now, maybe you feel like the Twins could potentially see some amount of drop off, but it's going to be very contested in both of the leagues for those final wild card spots. And this is not the type of baseball the Red Sox were hoping for coming out of the break. And you have members of the front office already. It's been a contentious couple years with Red Sox fans and their organization, but the fact that you had Breslow at one point about a week or so ago talking about how this Red Sox team has shown that they're worth investing into, and now he just put out a quote saying he's not sure what direction they are really going to buy into yet. I feel like they are going to drop out of this and that the Royals are going to be able to stay ahead of them as they are now 11 games over 500. They haven't lost a game yet coming out of the All-Star break. Now, granted, 3 of those wins came against the White Sox, who are the, like I mentioned, worst team in the MLB. But the Red Sox also just lost last night to the Rockies in a crazy game. So you can only use that level of competition cards so much. But it's going to be an interesting sort of to see how these organizations are going to act. I don't really see the Royals going out and being buyers. I feel like they are probably mostly locked into what they already currently are. The Red Sox have an opportunity to be. They are a bigger market, but it's not something that I really see happening. So, let me know what you think about the bottom of the American League wildcard race there. Quickly here on the National League, it does feel like for the most part that the divisions are kind of going to be wrapped up. The Phillies have been significantly ahead of anybody else in the NL East for the majority of the year. Currently have an 8.5 game lead over the Atlanta Braves, who also have just picked up a couple injuries to Max Fried and Ozzie Albies. So Phillies have to feel good about where they're at. Same with the Dodgers, 8.5 game lead over the San Diego Padres. The Central is where things can get a little bit more contentious, where the Brewers did very much exceed expectations during the first half of the year. And that's a team that, especially when they are, sort of almost ready for, I don't know if redemption is the right word, but they feel like they have been knocking for a while. They see their manager go and get bought out for the richest deal in MLB history when Craig Counsell left for the Cubs, that they feel like they can, kind of, I wouldn't say stick it to Counsell because he was a great manager for them for all those years, but to see him leave, the Cubs struggling, definitely underperforming there, for the Brewers to be able to sort of take off, it is a pretty interesting proposition there. But as for the wild card there as well, you look at the Pittsburgh Pirates, who are off to, again, we're only talking about a sample size of a few games here, but able to steal a series against the Phillies, and especially that first game, the way that they were able to dig it out in the, I think it was the 9th inning. Believe that they walked it off. Like that's just, for an organization that I feel like a lot of America is kind of rooting for to some degree with the Pirates, seeing them get that type of win against the Phillies and following that up as well with a series win. They're now a couple games over 500 and just half a game out of that wild card spot. But you look from the Cardinals, who are in that second wild card spot, to the Arizona Diamondbacks. There are, it looks like, 5 teams within a game and a half of one another. So that's going to be a very contentious race by the end of it, and going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. But, let me know where your predictions lie right now in terms of the expectations for what the postseason will look like. We are going to be switching gears here a little bit to the NBA and giving some final thoughts on the Summer League, which just wrapped up last night with the Miami Heat winning the championship. So stick with us and we will be right back with more coverage on that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and I just want to give some final thoughts here on the NBA Summer League in Vegas that just wrapped up. The Miami Heat ended up winning the championship over the Memphis Grizzlies. Ultimately, these were the two best teams, it seemed like, for the entirety of Summer League, and it was really exciting to see, especially some of these young prospects for both teams be able to, I wouldn't say fully develop by any means, but you look at Kel'el Ware, who had a great showing so far, the 15th overall pick. He was really impressive for them, but, I was really impressed by the Grizzlies, who end up being the runner-ups in this, but they had just a number of players that were getting real NBA playing time last season. The Grizzlies were very much diminished by a number of injuries to different starters. You can just go down the list, and basically every one of their best players were hurt, but getting guys like G.G. Jackson and Scottie Pippen Jr., even if you want to throw in the likes of like a Trey Jemison, who was playing for them last year in the NBA because they kind of had to. And I talked about this before on the show as it was happening. I was kind of addicted to the Grizzlies to some degree because they were not good. They lost the majority of their games. I think they won something like 23 games on the year, but they were just playing extremely hard every single game. They made things interesting way more than they should have, and I thought it was cool that they were able to sort of incorporate some of those guys that were a part of that team from last year that, granted, they are still very unproven, but you could have gotten a guy like G.G. Jackson, who made the second team for rookies last year and ended up being, a pretty efficient scorer, to have him buy into playing for the Summer League. And ultimately, I talked about it before on the show, I thought he was really impressive. There were moments that, he did, I wouldn't say fully struggle, but they talked about, Taylor Jenkins at least talked about on the broadcast, how they were trying to get him to not buy in more defensively, but take on more responsibilities, understanding that when he ends up going into next season, that he's going to have a very different role than he got during his rookie year, because of the fact that there's going to be a number of better, more NBA, more experienced scorers ahead of him, such as Marcus Smart or John Morant or Desmond Bane, and that it's going to be harder for him to sort of carve out those minutes for himself, especially if he is not a good defender. So I like the growth that we saw there. Scottie Pippen Jr. as well was also probably their best player. You could make an argument as well. He at least was last night in the championship game. But, again, sorry, Heat fans, if you're out there and you were hoping to hear more about, the Heat on this side of this. Ultimately, Ware was good. I thought that Pele Larson, they kept talking about on the broadcast about the fact that, anything was a surprise from the offensive end side of the floor, and that, he's going to be viewed more as a defender, which is interesting because when I watched him at Arizona, I thought he already was a very good scorer, and I was almost maybe sleeping on his defense a little bit. So he's someone that could end up being a very good two-way player for the Heat. You just feel like almost anybody in that organization has a chance at least to become a random role, guy off of the bench that goes out and gets results for the Heat, because that's what they consistently do with a lot of these sort of lesser known players. And really not too much else to say about it. The game was cool, went to overtime and everything. I don't mind the target score during the exhibition games, but I feel like they kind of should work on that. I would have preferred probably a timer against in that overtime, but regardless, not that deep. I did want to go back and I ran through the history of the Summer League a little bit just to look to see if there was any sort of a pattern or anything worth it to, some of these awards and such. The reality is, out of the champions of Summer League, there isn't much to it. Out of the last 10 Summer League champions, only 2 of the, finals MVPs were legitimate rotational players, which was Brandon Clark in 2019 and Kyle Kuzma in 2017. So there wasn't much of a pattern. I was running through a bunch of those rosters and trying to see if there was anything to it, and I wasn't really able to. I think there was a lot more extensive of a history in terms of the overall Summer League MVPs, and the majority of them are actually legitimate NBA players. I believe they started giving out the award in 2006, and the majority of the MVPs actually did have real NBA careers. Out of 18 winners, I would say that all but 2 would be considered NBA successes. I include guys that had, 10 plus years of a career, even if they were never a dominant player. But you look at Randy Foye, who won it in 2006, I think it was, Nate Robinson, Jared Bayless. They're all successes to me, considering the fact that they played in the NBA for 10 plus years. And maybe there is less guarantees on some of the more recent winners. Davion Mitchell, who the Kings just moved off of this offseason, was a lottery pick for them in 2021, so we'll see there. But Cam Thomas as well was co-MVP, I think, that same year as Mitchell. Cam Whitmore won it last season, and I have a lot of faith in him long term. All 3 of those guys could definitely be real rotational players that could be in the NBA for a while. There are some very notable names in terms of Blake Griffin, John Wall, and Damian Lillard. This year's MVP was Jalen Wilson, who plays on the Brooklyn Nets, averaged 21.8 points per game and 4.6 rebounds per game. Good efficiency, 55% from the field and from the three-point line. It was kind of weird how he was the MVP, but he wasn't even on the first team, which, I gotta be honest, I don't know if I was 100% even aware of the fact that they did first and second teams for this. But the first team consisted of Gigi Jackson, Jordan Miller of the LA Clippers, who had a big time emergence, Scottie Pippen Jr., Reed Shepherd, Khalil Ware. The second team was Jalen Wilson, along with Bub Carrington, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Jarris Walker, and Donovan Clingan. So kind of interesting that Wilson ends up, again, not even making first team, winning the MVP, and whether or not that could be a sign of anything, because I really liked Wilson when he was at Kansas, was a veteran presence there. He was always a reliable bucket getter. He ended up going late in the second round in 2023 for the Nets, and I'm just curious to see whether or not he could turn into something. He had a pretty pro-ready game, and he was pretty good in the Summer League last year, but struggled to get real playing time on a Nets team that wasn't very good. Now they are definitely in a different sort of mode now where they trade Mikal Bridges. They have their own first-round picks, so they don't really have to worry about winning games quite as much. He got 15 minutes per game last year. I'd like to think that sees some sort of an increase this year, but obviously no guarantees there. But, ultimately, Summer League's a fun thing, and it can help you sort of, if you were high on somebody beforehand, it can just sort of reaffirm, or on both spectrums, where if you don't like the player and they play bad, then you can just sort of reaffirm your own beliefs. But we don't really know anything until we actually get to see these guys in the NBA. So that being said, I do want to look into all of the lottery picks from this past 2024 draft and give out grades solely based off of Summer League performances. And just run through all 14 picks and give out letter grades. So we will be doing that after this quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we head into our final segment of the day, where I want to give out grades to each of the lottery picks from this past year's draft based off of how they performed in Summer League. Now, I want to note that this is not based off of my overall feelings on the picks and whether or not they will have any success, but a very small sample size here, so definitely keep that in mind. But without further ado here, the number 1 overall pick, Zachary Reese-Shea. Obviously, we had a lot of international players in this year's lottery, and it does lead to, I would do what I could to keep up with them, but at the same time, didn't really get to see all that much full game action. And my first impressions, really, from watching the full games with Reese-Shea is I see that he can be a good NBA player and that he can be probably a starter for the majority of teams once he does fully develop. Now, obviously, understanding being the number 1 overall pick, you have a little bit more drastic expectations behind you, but as far as what Reese-Shea can be, I don't think he's ever going to be a franchise player, but he did pretty well. And granted, just the 2 games that he played in, specifically the first game is where he was most impressive, but shooting splits were not quite where I'm sure the Hawks would have preferred them to be. Again, in a 2-game sample size, though, I mean, how much are you really going to how much stake are you going to put into that? But Reese-Shea, he's going to be able to play into the system offensively. He can be a plus defender when he puts all the tools together. So ultimately, I gave him a C+ with 14.5 points per game and 5 rebounds per game. Efficiency is going to be something that they'd like to work on, maybe a little bit defensively as well. But overall, I thought that he looked pretty solid. Can't say so much about the number 2 overall pick, Alex Sarr. Now, again, this is just based off of the games that we've already seen from these players in the Summer League. And Sarr, nobody is looking at what he did and said, yes, he gave really good production there. Now, I can see the long-term vision and the framework of how he can be an impactful player, but throughout the Summer League, he was really, really struggling. He was 9 of 47 from the floor in 4 games, just 19%. He was 2 of 17 from 3, so really bad there. Now, if you look at some of the rebounding and block numbers, they were good, 7.5 rebounds per game, 2.5 blocks per game, but especially during that game against Portland where he shot 0 for 15, you could see the fact that his offensive struggles were leading to a lack of intensity at times on the defensive end, I thought. And again, I feel like you look at a player who's 7 feet, he shot really poorly from 3 in this game, but I do think that that's a part of his game that we're going to be able to see develop at some point. He has all the fundamentals necessary from a defensive perspective. The 2.5 blocks per game, he's going to be facing obviously better competition once he's in the NBA, but he's a 7-footer that we know can play out on the perimeter. The fact is going to be if he can hold his own in the interior against bigger forces. And ultimately, he was a pretty good rim protector. Now, it's going to look differently again against NBA talent, but overall, I mean, D might be a little low. The highest I could really get with him is a D+, because again, the offense was horrendous for him, and that doesn't mean I'm out on him entirely, but we're talking about just these 4 games. He was very bad. But on the other hand, you did have some stars really shining out. Reed Sheppard being probably the biggest one. I think he was the most impressive rookie in the Summer League. He was a former 6-man at Kentucky University, and the question was going to be, is he capable of taking on a bigger workload? And, just the Summer League, but the answer would be yes to that question, at least as of now, where that he didn't even really have his 3-point shot with him this Summer League, and he was still an incredibly impactful player. 20 points per game, 5.3 assists per game, 4.8 rebounds per game, shot 50% from the field, even defensively, 2.8 steals per game. I've always been a believer in just his hands and his instincts in terms of getting steals, but also 1.3 blocks per game, pretty good for Reed Sheppard. I give him an A. I think he was the best rookie in the Summer League so far. So that's where I stand with him. Stephon Castle, tough evaluation because he only played 1 game. It wasn't extremely efficient, just 8 of 21 from the field. But I talked about this before. I thought that was in large part because of the fact that there weren't really other players around him to take some of those shots. I thought he got stuck in difficult positions where you had to sort of jack up a bad shot because he wasn't really around other NBA talent. I feel like once he is surrounded by more legitimate talent, he's going to probably not look to be a primary scorer quite as much. He wants to be a point guard. I think he wants to facilitate more if possible, and he's going to have options in front of him with some really nice players in Devin Vassell and in Victor Wembanyama to try and make that be the case. But you can see already the defensive intensity, his job around the perimeter and even, inside as well. He is going to be an elite defender. It's why I think that he's a very safe bet in terms of being a real rotation player in the NBA. Give him a C+ in this. Again, just 1 game. Definitely has room to grow, but showed the baseline of what he can be. Number 5 overall pick, Ron Holland. He is another player that played in the G League Ignite. I didn't get to see quite as much, but some very impressive, just moments. I would say more than anything. It's not like he was incredible from an efficiency standpoint, but I mean, this is a guy that the athleticism screams at you from the TV screen, and just the way that he is able to play with such a level of explosiveness. He is going to be an impact guy. Now, the fit with Detroit, obviously a team that can't shoot all that well already. He didn't necessarily have a tremendous efficiency throughout the Summer League, but still averaged 18.8 points per game, 6.5 rebounds per game, 1.5 steals per game, and 1 block per game. I give him a B+. I was very happy with what I saw from him. Again, that entire Pistons group is going to have to learn to be a better offense to try and space out a little bit more. But Ron Holland, you see an NBA frame there 100%. Tijan Salon, the hustle player, you could say, for the Charlotte Hornets, just is going to be a player that I'm so excited to watch in the way that he is just always willing to try and outwork you, 110% effort. Going to be great for the culture in Charlotte. I think him and Brandon Miller are going to be a duo that Salon still has a lot of room to grow in terms of the consistency of his game and the offensive side, but as he learns everything, as he irons out the shortcomings, he's going to be a very nice addition to this Hornets roster that is trying to, under new head coach Charles Lee, be able to sort of correct where things have been going wrong the past number of years for them in terms of what a winning culture looks like. So I give him a B there. Donovan Clingan up next, the number 7 overall pick. Some crazy numbers from him rebounding and defensively, with leading the summer league in rebounds per game and blocks per game. 12.3 boards, 4.3 blocks. We know he has the potential to be a real anchor defensively, and he definitely showed that off. Now, the concern was with his offense. Not efficient, 36% from the field. That is not good from the center position. Not just that, that's frankly bad from the center position. He took some threes. It was 3.3 attempts per game. That's not something that you expect from him coming into the NBA. Now, it was interesting to see him sort of letting it fly a little bit because that wasn't his role at UConn either. It's clearly something that he's working on. We'll see if it ever does translate for him. And the three-pointers ultimately did bring down his average a little bit more, but I'm going to have to be more efficient. I think that he will be a strong finisher in the pick and roll. I ultimately, though, again, with the defensive upside we see from him and the way that he was able to hold his own, I'm giving him a B+. The 8th overall pick, Rob Dillingham. Dillingham was kind of outshined by his teammate in Terrence Shannon Jr., just generally speaking here. Dillingham, like Shepard, was coming off of the bench for Kentucky last year and is going to, at least in this situation with the Summer League team, was asked to do a little bit more. The transition for him wasn't quite as seamless as it was for Reed Shepard, but I still was able to get to some of his spots, wasn't necessarily converting at the rate he would have liked to, 36 and 31% shooting splits, but was an excellent playmaker throughout his summer league performances, averaged 7.6 assists per game. You would like to think that eventually the shot, he's always been a tough shot maker, that's going to come. The Timberwolves are just going to need him to be able to run a second unit, be another player that can actually take the ball up the court and initiate some sort of an offense. And again, that efficiency comes around, and the defense is definitely another conversation with Dillingham, but they just need to start with having some sort of a backup option after Mike Conley, because he is getting older and they don't really have anybody else. Number 9 overall pick, Zach Edey. Probably, for anybody who actually got on the court at least, the least amount of playing time, only 9 minutes in Vegas. I'm giving him a C+, though, because even outside of that, he did have the little bit of experience when he was playing in the Salt Lake City tournament. He was able to go up against some of the bigs of Utah in Walker Kessler and Kyle Filipowski, and he was a physical force, and he showed that he is capable of being a starter. Now, I thought about putting him with a B-, but there were still some things that even in that, Salt Lake City tournament, you could see defensively when it gets to the pick and roll against some of the more talented ball handlers and shot makers in the NBA, I feel like they could make him pay more. So I'm in on Edey as being somebody who can get minutes, but he's supposed to be the starter for the Grizzlies this year. Think he's going to have a lot of, positives as a prospect, but at the same time, again, some of those flaws could definitely come into fruition, and maybe there is injury concern. Knock on wood, hopefully not, because, one of the best college basketball players I've ever seen, and I want to see him at least get a fair chance at the NBA. I'm going to try and go a little bit rapid fire here for the last few picks because we are running out of time. But Cody Williams really, really impressed me. Just based off of, maybe it's myself that I was underrating him a little bit too much. When he was at Colorado, I really didn't see much in his offensive game. Pretty mediocre handle. He was a good finisher, but outside of that, very little outside shot, it seemed like. And I thought that he proved me wrong on a number of those things. Actually, wasn't the cleanest handles in the world necessarily, but I saw him take a lot of guys off the dribble and get himself opportunities, both in pull-ups and finishing at the rim. So, assuming that, he is able to iron out the details a little bit, he has the frame to be able to be an NBA player. He finished tremendously in this game. 15 points per game, 55% from the field, 38% from three. Can't ask much more of him than that. So I was very happy with how he looked. I'm giving him an A-. Again, maybe overcompensating a little bit because I was too low on him coming into the draft. Not that I thought he was going to be a bust necessarily, but I was struggling to see. I did have some concerns, and it's not fully over, but in terms of what he's going to be able to do to round out his offensive game, I thought he showed a lot of flashes there. Number 11 pick, Manas Buzelis. Not his most efficient showing necessarily over the course of the few games that he played, but his intensity is just infectious to watch, and I really am looking forward to seeing how he could take over as a potential leader for the Bulls, as it seems like they are headed into a rebuild. Now, consistency with the jump shot is going to be something that is kind of, I don't know if I'm ready to go make or break necessarily with Buzelis in the NBA, but someone where if he had the consistency of that jump shot, he very likely could have gone number 1 overall. Now, that has not been the case, but ultimately, if he's able to get that down, he's going to be a franchise cornerstone. Next couple guys here, Nikola Topic and Devin Carter. Both of them were injured. Topic dealing with his torn ACL, so he's going to miss this entire year. Devin Carter, I believe it was a torn labrum that he underwent surgery for a couple weeks ago. That's what John Morant was dealing with. So they're saying they're going to reevaluate in 6 months. I am a little skeptical about whether or not he's going to be able to return. So we will see there. But no grades for either one of them, obviously, because neither of them played. And then the final lottery pick, Bub Carrington for the Washington Wizards. Was nice for Wizards fans after seeing more of a project player in Alex Sarr struggling early on. To see Bub Carrington, their other lottery pick, show some flashes of potential. He was a little bit of a late riser in the draft process, at least during the college basketball season. And I thought that he showed out really well as a playmaker in the summer league here. Shot well from three specifically. Overall efficiency wasn't great. Defensively is going to need a little bit of work, but ultimately had a pretty good summer league. I am giving him a B+. But let me know who you think I hit on, missed on, who your favorite players from the summer league were. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.